The calendar invite arrived at 11 minutes past 2 on a Monday afternoon. I was halfway along the third-floor corridor at Saunders Group headquarters, laptop under one arm and cold coffee in the other, when the notification lit up my phone. Meeting, Executive Office, Stephen Gale, 14:30. No agenda. No agenda. In 2 years here, I had never received a direct request from the chief executive with nothing attached. I told myself it was about my compliance report, 6 months of careful work documenting serious financial irregularities at the top of the organization. I had submitted it the previous Friday. This was the follow-up. My name is Freya Harding. I am 34 years old and a senior compliance analyst at Saunders Group, a financial services firm in the heart of the city. Until that Monday, I had genuinely believed that doing the right thing would protect me. I stepped into the lift. As the doors began to close, my phone vibrated once. One message. From Joel Brennan, my closest colleague and the only person at Saunders Group I truly trusted. Do not go in alone. I read it twice. I typed back, why? What do you know? No reply came. The lift moved upward without waiting. The doors opened. Standing directly outside Stephen Gale's office, clipboard held against her chest and expression completely unreadable, was the head of human resources. My stomach turned to cold stone. If this story has already gripped you, please subscribe and hit the notification bell, and drop a comment below telling me what you think Joel knew. Stephen Gale greeted me with a rehearsed smile, warm on the surface, hollow underneath. He gestured to the chair across his desk as though this were a routine exchange between colleagues. The head of human resources sat to my left and placed a manila folder on the table without a word. Inside were printed emails. Sent from my company account. Each one appeared to show me forwarding sensitive client data to an external address I had never seen before. We have reason to believe, Gale said, his voice level, that confidential client information was leaked from your workstation over a period of several weeks. I did not send those emails, I said. My voice held steadier than I expected. This has been fabricated. He did not react. The timestamps match your working hours. The terminal address matches your desk. Our technical team confirmed it this morning. I examined the pages more closely. The phrasing was slightly off, close enough to my writing style to pass a quick glance, but not quite right. The formatting was too clean. Every detail had been chosen deliberately. Someone had built this with patience. I was forming a direct challenge when he spoke again. We have already informed the legal team. We would ask you to remain in the building whilst the matter is reviewed. He folded his hands on the desk and looked at me with the expression of a man who had decided the outcome a long time before I entered the room. Those words settled like a sentence already passed. We have already informed legal. I left the executive office on legs that barely felt like mine. The head of human resources walked me to the lift in silence, pressed the button for the 3rd floor, and let the doors close without a word. I had made it no further than the stairwell door when it opened from the other side. Joel Brennan pulled me in and checked through the small window before turning to face me. Your credentials were used on Friday night, he said. I was in the building just after 11 when I passed the server room. 2 senior executives were coming out. I recognized them both. One was using a key card that should not have worked on that door. You are certain it was I checked the access log this morning. Your card is recorded entering that room at 11:14. You were not in the building. I was there. I would have seen you. He lowered his voice. The camera footage from that corridor between 10 and midnight has been deleted. Every file from that window is gone. I pressed my back against the wall. This was not a mistake or a coincidence. Someone had used my identity to enter a restricted room, and every trace had been removed before the working day began. Joel, I said, what are they planning to blame me for? He looked at me with an expression I had not seen before, a person who knows the answer and wishes they did not. Something large enough to require someone else to absorb the consequences, he said. And they chose you. I barely slept that night. By 6:30 on Tuesday morning, I was dressed and rehearsing my options. going over each one until the daylight came through the curtains properly. I arrived at Saunders Group at 8:30 and swiped my access card at the main entrance barrier. The reader made a flat, dead click. The barrier did not move. I tried again. Nothing. Within seconds, a security officer appeared at my elbow, not the familiar morning guard but a different one, broad-shouldered and carefully neutral. "Miss Harding. I have been asked to escort you through the lobby." "Not upstairs, through the lobby. Out." As we crossed the atrium, I noticed colleagues watching from the level above. Others stood near the reception desk on the ground floor. Some stared openly. The rest studied their phones with concentrated effort. Not one person spoke or met my eyes. Word had spread since yesterday afternoon. I could see it in the careful distance each person maintained, the posture of those who have been told that standing near someone carries a cost, and have decided the cost is too high. As the security officer reached to push open the front door, a hand brushed my sleeve. The receptionist, a young woman who had greeted me without fail every morning for 2 years, pressed a folded sticky note gently into my palm without looking up. I kept walking. I did not unfold it until I reached the car park. For words, they were in your office after midnight. I sat in my car for a long while, the note flat on the passenger seat. Not only the server room. My actual office, my desk, my terminal, my files. Someone had been inside them whilst I was asleep. I needed evidence held somewhere they could not reach. For 6 months, I had been quietly saving working copies of every file related to my compliance report onto a personal laptop at home, stored under an unremarkable folder name. It was a precaution I had taken instinctively, without fully knowing why, the way you lock a gate you assume nobody will ever try. I drove home. I opened the laptop. I navigated to the folder. It was empty. Not moved. Not archived. Deleted, cleanly, completely, with no trace in the activity log. Someone had accessed my device remotely whilst I slept. 6 months of work. Annotated financial statements, transaction records. A documented trail connecting the company's offshore accounts to shell entities with no legitimate purpose. All of it, gone. I sat very still with that for a moment and tried to think. Then I remembered the board meeting. Weeks earlier, before my access was revoked, I had noted it in the executive calendar, a full board review scheduled for this coming Friday. 3 days away. The timing was not accidental. My report could have reached that meeting and changed everything. They needed it destroyed before Friday, and I removed it before I could rebuild it. I picked up my phone and called Joel Brennan. Joel chose a cafe called Whitmore's, busy enough that a quiet conversation in the corner went unremarked. We met at 6:30 that Tuesday evening, sitting far enough from the nearest table to speak without being overheard. He looked worn in a way that had nothing to do with tiredness. "Stephen Gale is not protecting the company," he said. "He is protecting himself. Specifically, his brother-in-law." He spoke carefully. "The offshore accounts in my compliance report were not linked to anonymous investors. They traced back to 6 shell companies registered across 3 jurisdictions, all ultimately controlled by Garrett Wills, Stephen Gale's brother-in-law and the sole director of a private holding entity that appeared on no official Saunders Group documentation whatsoever. For 4 years, pension contributions belonging to more than 2,000 employees had been quietly funneled through those companies. Most had never been returned. The board review on Friday was the deadline, a scheduled audit presentation that would have exposed everything had my report reached the room. "How do you know all of this?" I asked. Joel reached into his jacket and placed a single folded page on the table, a ledger extract. Columns of figures, dates, and account numbers. No names attached. "I copied this from the server before they wiped it Friday night," he said. I looked at him. "I know," he said quietly, before I could speak. "They know I helped you. Someone saw me accessing those files this morning. I believe I have been watched since then." I had barely returned to my car when my phone rang from an unknown number. I sat in the dark for a moment before I answered. "Miss Harding." The voice was quiet and controlled, as though the speaker were monitoring the space around her. My name is Diana Marsh. I am a solicitor in the legal department at Saunders Group. I cannot use any company line for this conversation. I waited. I was instructed on Monday morning to prepare your dismissal documentation, she said. Not after an investigation concluded. Before one was opened. The folder placed in front of you in Stephen Gale's office, I compiled those documents 48 hours before you were ever called upstairs. That would mean the outcome was decided. Before a single question was asked of you. I am fully aware of what it means. A pause. I should not be contacting you. But I am going to send you something now. An email arrived from a personal address minutes later. The attachment was a single internal memorandum dated the previous Saturday. Subject, FH, Preliminary Dismissal Package. My initials at the top of a document written before any investigation had formally been opened. I saved the attachment to 3 separate locations immediately and sat back in the seat. Then I called Diana back. The line rang twice and fell completely silent, not voicemail, not engaged. Just nothing. I tried a second time. It rang out and disconnected. Diana Marsh had stopped answering entirely. Through a cached browser login not yet deactivated, I located Diana Marsh's home address in the company's staff directory. By 6 o'clock that Wednesday evening, I was parked on the street outside a converted terraced building on the south side of the city. Her car, a dark green hatchback I recognized from the Saunders Group car park, sat in the residence bay below. The windows upstairs were dark. She was not in the flat. She was in the driver's seat of her car, engine off, windows misted over from the inside. When I tapped on the glass, she flinched hard enough to knock her knee against the steering column. She unlocked the door. I got in beside her. She sat with her hands folded in her lap and her eyes fixed straight ahead. They called me in this afternoon, she said. 2 senior executives. They placed documents in front of me, backdated versions of the investigation timeline, and said I had already signed them. I had not. She exhaled slowly. They said I needed to countersign to confirm the dates. They made the alternative very clear. She reached beneath her seat and produced a small brown envelope. I photographed the originals before I signed anything. I reached for it. At that moment, headlights swept the wall ahead of us. Then a second pair. 2 large dark 4x4s had turned slowly into the car park entrance behind us. Diana went completely rigid beside me. Go, she whispered. Right now. Leave. Joel arranged the meeting without explaining how. He said only that the woman had agreed to speak and that we should arrive separately to avoid drawing attention. The address was a quiet house on the north side of the city, set back behind a low hedge. The kind of house belonging to someone who had lived there for 30 years with no intention of going anywhere. Evelyn Mercer answered the door herself. She was in her late 60s, upright, composed, with the particular stillness of someone who has observed a great deal and long since stopped being surprised by it. She had been a founding member of Saunders Group's board before resigning quietly several months earlier, an event noted internally and quickly forgotten by those who were relieved to see her go. She showed us into a sitting room lined with folders and let us speak first. I described everything since Monday. Joel placed the ledger extract on her coffee table. She studied it without touching it. This is not the first time, she said. She described how Stephen Gale had manipulated the company's internal audit process for at least 6 years. When a discrepancy became too large to conceal, he would identify a mid-level employee, experienced enough to be a credible suspect, visible enough that accusations would hold, and build a quiet case against them before any outside body could investigate. He has done this 3 times that I know of, she said. Each person was made to appear guilty. Not one of them was. She looked at me directly. You are the 4th. I was back at my flat by mid-morning on Thursday when the messages began arriving. The first was from a former colleague who sent a link without explanation. I opened it and watched for roughly 40 seconds before I had to stop. It was a short video. Professionally produced, appearing to show me seated at my desk inside Saunders Group, looking into a camera. The voice approximated mine closely, the cadence, pacing, and pronunciation all carefully constructed. The figure on screen appeared to describe, calmly, how she had sold client data to a competitor for personal financial gain. I had never sat in front of that camera. I had never spoken those words. Within an hour, it had been forwarded across internal company channels and 2 industry forums. Former colleagues posted beneath it, some expressing shock, others contempt. A few I had considered genuine friends said nothing, which in many ways was the worst response of all. I called Joel immediately. He had already seen it. He told me to watch the 40-second to 45-second section with the sound off. I did. There was a fractional stutter in the jaw movement, a misalignment between mouth motion and syllables. The audio, isolated from the ambient sound, carried a faint tonal flatness that did not belong to the surrounding space. The video had been fabricated. Assembled from publicly available recordings of my voice and image into something that had never happened. They were prepared to erase my identity completely to protect themselves. My phone rang at 7:30 on Thursday evening. A number I had not seen appear on my screen in almost 2 years. My father, Patrick Harding. He had seen the video. Someone had forwarded it to him, he did not say who, and I did not ask. We had not spoken with ease in a long while. He had spent 30 years as a forensic accountant before retiring with what I had always understood, even as a child, to be a considerable weight of professional disappointment held quietly inside him. He was methodical, cautious, and uninterested in sentiment, which meant that when he spoke directly, it was worth listening to carefully. "Tell me what has happened," he said. "From the beginning. Leave nothing out." I told him everything. He did not interrupt once. When I finished, there was a brief pause. Then, people do not frame someone with this degree of thoroughness unless they believe the alternative is prison. His voice was even and precise. "What you are describing is not panic. It is a system. Someone built it and has used it before." I told him about Evelyn Mercer. He was quiet for a moment. "How much documentation do you currently hold yourself?" he asked. I listed what remained, Diana's memorandum, Joel's ledger extract, and the photographs from the car park. "Not enough on its own," he said. "But it is a beginning. Then, for the first time in 20 minutes, I want to help you. Will you let me?" I said yes before he had finished the sentence. My father arrived the following morning, Friday, the day of the board meeting. He brought 2 laptops, a portable hard drive, and 30 years of professional instinct. We worked at my kitchen table with every document I had retained spread between us. He moved through the material with the systematic efficiency of someone who had spent decades making sense of figures arranged deliberately to mislead. Midway through the morning, he paused. "Look at this," he said. He had been examining archived tax records of Saunders Group's earliest corporate filings, publicly accessible documents on a government registry database, the kind that accumulate over years and are rarely examined with purpose. Inside a submission from 6 years earlier was a reference to an internal audit document. The reference number indicated that a formal attachment should exist. No attachment had ever been filed. It took him 40 minutes across 3 separate database platforms to locate it. The document had been submitted in error to a secondary filing address and never cross-referenced. No one had known to look for it. It was 11 pages long. It linked £19 million of missing employee pension contributions directly to the shell companies controlled by Garrett Wills. 6 named executives appeared as signatories to internal transfers. Stephen Gale's signature appeared on 4 of them. We sat in silence. "They do not know this exists," my father said. "They believe they destroyed everything," I agreed. He looked at me steadily. "Then today has to count," he said. "All of it." I tried calling Joel at midday on Friday. Straight to voicemail. I tried twice more across the next 2 hours. Nothing. I drove slowly past the street where his flat was. His car was not there. The curtains were drawn in a way that looked permanent rather than private. I rang Saunders Group's main reception from a payphone on the corner, asking for Joel Brennan by name. The receptionist told me, without any hesitation at all, that he had resigned voluntarily earlier that week and was no longer with the company. I stood on the pavement with the receiver in my hand and felt the cold that comes not from the weather but from understanding something you had genuinely hoped would not be true. I drove home. I could not think clearly enough to be useful. My father made tea and we sat without speaking for a while, which helped considerably more than words would have done. At 3:20, my email lit up. A message had arrived, timestamped 2 days earlier and scheduled to deliver now, sent by someone who had known they might not be available to send it themselves. The address was encrypted and unfamiliar. The subject line was unmistakable, from Joel. Read this carefully. I opened it. One sentence, if you are reading this, they have already been through my desk. Below it was a single file attachment. I looked at my father across the table. His expression was completely still. I clicked to open the file. The attachment was an audio recording. 53 seconds long. Captured inside a large enclosed room, the resonance of hard walls, a long table, and several people seated around it. The kind of room I knew well. I pressed play. The first voice I recognized immediately. Stephen Gale. Calm and unhurried, using the same measured register he had employed when he told me the legal team had already been informed. The report has been neutralized. She will not be able to reconstruct it before Friday. What we need now is for the dismissal to be concluded before the auditors arrive. If she creates noise publicly, it remains manageable. A second voice, older, what about Brennan? A brief silence. Gale, if he becomes a problem, we address him the same way. We have sufficient material to discredit him before anyone reaches the board. Second voice, and if it does not hold long enough? Gale, then we ruin him too. The recording ended. 53 seconds. A named executive, in plain language, is discussing the deliberate destruction of 2 people's lives to conceal a criminal act. No ambiguity. No room for interpretation. I sat very still for a long moment. My father had been listening from across the table. He set his cup down without a sound. That, he said, in the measured tone of a man who had spent 30 years speaking professionally about evidence, is a confession recorded by the person it was made against. He looked at me steadily. Now we take it somewhere it cannot be buried again. The town hall was scheduled for 3 o'clock that Friday afternoon, broadcast live across the company's internal streaming platform. My father and I watched from my kitchen table. Stephen Gale appeared in a well-lit conference room, jacket on, expression open and concerned. He thanked staff for their patience during what he described as an unsettling period involving a serious breach of internal trust. He spoke about the company's values, without naming me, but making his meaning entirely clear to anyone who had heard the rumors. He described the individual responsible for the data irregularities as having been identified and removed. 214 people were watching the stream. The viewer count was visible in the corner. Several department heads sat in a composed row behind him, maintaining the expression of people who have been told precisely where to look and what their faces should convey. Joel had not been mentioned once. At the 22-minute mark, something changed. One executive in the background turned to look at something behind the camera. A second stood up without explanation. Gale stopped mid-sentence. For 4 seconds, the audio stayed live and the frame held still. Then, at the far edge of the picture, 2 figures in plain dark jackets moved quickly across the back wall of the conference room, each holding identification that caught the overhead light briefly as they passed. Officers from the National Crime Agency's Financial Crime Unit had entered the building during the live broadcast. The stream cut to a blank screen 4 seconds later. I drove to the building. I had been escorted out by security less than 4 days earlier. My access card was deactivated. Every rational instinct told me to wait at home and let the investigators work. But Joel was somewhere in that building, or had recently been, and something had carried me through the past 4 days that was considerably stronger than caution. I entered through the side entrance using a security code that had not yet been changed. The fact that it still worked told me the lockdown had not been conducted with any great care. The executive floor was partially deserted. Officers from the financial crime unit moved through the open plan area, working methodically through filing cabinets. Nobody questioned my presence or asked who I was. I found Stephen Gale in the narrow corridor beside the executive boardroom. He was alone, jacket undone, the composed version of himself entirely gone. He saw me and something moved across his face, recognition, then fury, then something underneath both that I believe was fear, quickly suppressed. "You have ruined everything," he said quietly. Before I could respond, he stepped forward and gripped my arm, hard enough to bruise through the fabric of my sleeve. I did not pull away. With my free hand, I reached into my jacket pocket and held my phone between us, screen facing outward. The recording application had been running for 47 seconds. He looked at the phone. He released my arm. He said nothing more. Joel reappeared on Saturday morning. He called from a number I did not have saved. His voice carried the tiredness of someone who had been very careful and quiet for several days and was not quite ready to stop being either. He had spent 4 days at his sister's house in the Midlands. Corporate security had followed him on Wednesday evening, the same dark vehicle parked outside his building twice within 2 hours, not bothering to conceal itself. He had taken an early train the following morning without telling anyone his destination. "I needed them to believe I had gone properly," he said. "So they would stop watching and I could return when it mattered." I told him about the town hall, the officers entering during the broadcast, the recording, and the corridor confrontation. He was quiet for a moment. Then, "I have something else." What he brought to my flat that afternoon was a set of encrypted bank transfer records, obtained through a contact inside the company's treasury department who had been troubled by the same irregularities for months and had never known who to trust with them. The records showed, in sequential detail, that Stephen Gale had been using stolen pension funds to build a personal holding account at a private bank registered in the Channel Islands. The transfers had accelerated sharply over the previous 6 weeks. A series of international payments was scheduled to leave the account within 48 hours. He had been preparing to disappear entirely. The board convened an emergency session the following Wednesday. Financial crime investigators had spent 5 days freezing relevant accounts, issuing holding orders on Gale's personal assets, and formally requesting a board meeting to address the company's governance position. Evelyn Mercer had given a detailed statement to investigators on the Saturday following the broadcast. Her testimony, supported by original financial records she had retained from her time as a founding board member, had accelerated the process considerably. The boardroom carried the particular silence of a room where serious things are about to be said without any possibility of taking them back. My father and I presented the buried audit document, the ledger extract, the predetermined dismissal memorandum, and Joel's treasury transfer records. Diana Marsh had provided a written statement confirming she had been coerced into backdating documentation. Joel presented the audio recording to the board directly. Stephen Gale sat at the far end of the table with the company's legal representative beside him. He made one attempt to challenge the pension fund document, arguing it was unverified and had been improperly obtained. Evelyn Mercer placed a folder on the table and opened it without comment. Inside were original board minutes from 6 years earlier, signed by Gale himself, confirming the transfers described in the buried audit to the exact penny. 3 board members turned to look at him simultaneously. The legal representative beside him shifted his chair back by several inches, a small movement, but an unmistakably telling one. Stephen Gale was arrested at 11:47 on that same Wednesday morning, in the atrium of Saunders Group's headquarters building. I was standing in the corridor 1 level above, looking down through the glass balcony railing, when officers led him across the marble floor in front of the reception desk. Employees had gathered at the atrium edges, the instinct to witness something irreversible competing with the instinct to look elsewhere. He walked with his chin raised and jaw set. I suppose it was the only dignity available to him at that particular moment. The executives who had sat in a composed row behind him during the town hall broadcast, maintaining their careful expressions whilst he blamed me in front of 200 people, had been providing investigators with statements since Saturday morning. Each was eager to establish, with some urgency, that they had privately harbored doubts about his conduct all along. I did not feel the satisfaction I had perhaps expected. Standing there watching it happen, I felt something quieter, the steadiness that comes not from winning but from having been correct, and from knowing that the account people would read the following morning would finally be the true one. Diana Marsh's written statement was formally on record. Joel's evidence had been submitted in full. My father had made a separate written submission based on the buried audit document. Garrett Wills, Gail's brother-in-law and the architect of the entire shell company network, was arrested at his home address the same afternoon. Several months have passed since that Wednesday in the atrium. Stephen Gale pleaded guilty to financial fraud and breach of fiduciary duty and received a custodial sentence. Garrett Wills faces a separate ongoing criminal proceeding. The shell companies have been formally unwound. The recovery of the pension funds is underway, slow work, and the full damage will take years to untangle. I now work at Alderton Advisory, leading an ethics and governance unit. The work is quieter and more predictable, which I value considerably more than I once would have done. Joel joined the same firm 3 months after I did. He is the same person he was in that stairwell, measured, clear, and entirely unwilling to stand aside when something is wrong. Diana Marsh rebuilt her legal career at an independent practice. My father and I have Sunday dinners most weeks. He asks questions rather than giving answers, different from how things were, and considerably better. Last month, a nervous young employee knocked on my office door. She said the chief executive wanted to see her alone and did not know what it concerned. She looked exactly as I must have looked stepping into that lift. I asked her to sit down. I told her what to bring, who to tell, and how to document everything before she walked through that door. Then I gave her the only words that had ever truly mattered. Do not go in alone. If this story moved you, please subscribe, leave a comment below, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Your support means everything.